Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Marcia, and congratulations to everybody who's been involved with the Jewish Foundation in general and the Women's Endowment Fund in particular. I hope that you are so proud of the success that you've had over the years, and it's absolutely, I love this luncheon, and it's great to be here after doing something useful and participating in it. So thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I'd like to, first of all, recognize Member of Parliament Joyce Bateman, the Honourable Christine Melnick, and City Councillors Paula Habetzbeck and Debbie Sharma. Thank you all for being here, friends, family, and my mother, Gail Asper. When Marcia asked me to come and speak to you, like about 22 years ago it seems, and the topic for my speech was, how I built a museum, but so much has happened that I've actually had to change a few things, and we'll get to talking about them later. I also want to say that I'm passionate about the Jewish Foundation, and I believe deeply in the importance of creating a strong, permanent fund that will benefit our community in perpetuity. And I hope each and every one of you here, if it's relevant, have signed the Endowment Book of Life. And I promise to get on to getting to my permanent fund set up at the foundation, and I encourage you all to do so as well. I also have to say a thank you to Sister Leslie. She's doing incredible work with the House of Peace, and we're delighted to support it. Sister Leslie was also one of the very vigorous supporters of the Human Rights Museum when it first came to the attention of the Winnipeg Foundation. She was on the Winnipeg Foundation board, and she spoke passionately in support of their unprecedented multi-million-dollar gift, and really got what it could do for the community. She's a visionary, and we are so lucky to have leaders like her in our community. That's mantra, never do a little deal. What that means is, it takes as much work to do a little deal as a big deal, but the rewards are not nearly as rewarding, so you might as well go for the big deal. And even if this is the last big thing that I work on, which probably won't be, it will have been worth it. My other very big dream, which I fear will never be realized in my lifetime, is to get the speed limit changed from 50 to 60 on Grant Avenue. Councillors Habetzbeck and Sharma. Listen, I'm aligned in the city budget, so that new money that you put in, it's coming from me, okay? For us Jewish women who call Winnipeg home, this museum should be very near and dear to our hearts, because 2011 marks the centennial anniversary of International Women's Day, and it is an important opportunity to reflect on how much women's rights have advanced even in our lifetime. And you think about how we've progressed, the progress is staggering, and without these tremendous strides and the tireless work and struggles of champions of women's rights and human rights before us, we would not be sitting here today with all the opportunities and benefits we enjoy, and frankly, which most of us really take for granted. Advances really did come from feminists like Nellie McClung, who in 1916 led the fight for women's rights and made Manitoba the first province to give women the vote. And then in 1929 led the charge for women to be officially declared persons. Now whenever I mention Nellie, somebody always comes out afterwards and, Gail, do you realize that Nellie McClung was a very racist individual? And I'm sure she was, but I'm willing to give her some slack. She was a product of her times. And besides, she has the best mantra. Never retreat, never explain, never apologize. Get the thing done and let them howl. I love that. That's my philosophy. It certainly has been my philosophy regarding some of the folks who have a problem with having a Holocaust gallery in the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. More on that later. We would not be looking at all the women who have recently run in civic and federal elections and will be running in the upcoming provincial election. I too would like to thank Anita Neville for her work over the years. She was a tireless supporter of the museum and helped when the museum was going for the crucial vote. It was presented by the Conservative government, but we needed unanimous support of all the parties, or this thing would have been held up for months, even years, in Senate committees and so on. So she helped smooth the way to get unanimous consent. So we are very, very grateful for that. I wish Joyce Bateman much success in the new government. Being in federal politics is tough. It's tough for women. It's tough for women with families. It's a grind flying back and forth. I resent so much when the media attacks politicians needlessly. It is an incredible sacrifice to be in public office. My dad always said that everybody, frankly, should take 5 years to serve in public life, maybe behind the scenes or front of the scenes, and I haven't had the guts to do it, so thank you for having the guts to do that, and thank you for the courage and leadership you show. We need more voices of women in government, and I appreciate all that you're going to be doing. And by the way, it was Joy Smith who became the museum's champion after Prime Minister Harper was elected. So there's another woman who's made a positive impact by getting involved in the political world. And we really owe a great debt of gratitude to all the women who came before us and who said, enough, women deserve the same rights and opportunities as men. And we owe a huge debt of gratitude to the men who stood beside them to support women's equality. I'd like to take a moment to thank my dad, Gail Asper, who encouraged me to go to law school and who always told me I should be able to earn my own living and to look after myself and my kids if necessary. He said, never be beholden to others for your welfare. Not to me, your dad, not your brothers, your husbands, or your sons. And those words have stayed with me for 3 decades. Today, more girls are in school, more women hold jobs and are in public office and have meaningful roles in the boardroom and in business, and it's looking good. But we need to ensure that women and girls here and everywhere have the opportunity around the world to reach their full potential. And we know from every day when we read the newspaper that there are still many countries that actively and officially oppose women's equality, where women are fighting violence and oppression and struggling to gain the advances and rights that we've enjoyed in Canada for decades. And interestingly enough, I should note that there's one group of women who can be relied on to take up the cause of social justice and women's rights. It's Jewish women. It seems that leadership, human rights, and Jewish women go together like bagels, lox, and cream cheese. I mean, it's hard not to be inspired by former leaders like Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan and Bella Abzug and Hannah Solomon, who founded the National Council of Jewish Women. Nationally, we have lovely leaders like Rosie Abella and Heather Reisman, who recently mobilized hundreds of thousands of people, including Lorraine Harper, to protest the stoning of Sakina Mohammadi Ashtiani in Iran. And that sent a very strong message that the world is watching. And when the world is watching, human rights are generally more observed than if the world stands silent. We all know what happens when people watch by in silence. Locally, I have to tip my hat to folks like Marjorie Blankstein and Yetta Gold, who have been incredibly inspirational to all of us for their tireless work to advance women's rights, social justice, rights of the elderly and the disabled. So I have been inspired by all the work of these women, and it therefore wasn't a big stretch to embrace the notion of the Human Rights Museum, where we hope we are going to be advancing human rights even more. Now, when it comes to human rights, sometimes it's hard to know whether we should be celebrating or working harder, and in fact, the decision is that that's exactly what the Human Rights Museum is going to do. We have to do both. We have to celebrate and pat ourselves on the back for advances, but we've got to continue to work harder. I want to remind everybody that this museum is not about story after story of atrocities, right, Stuart? Right. Stuart, our fearless leader, the CEO of the museum, is here, and there's never been a more energetic and optimistic guy. You have to be an optimistic, like my dad was, to lead this museum. So it's all about how people have risen above atrocities and adversity. It's about celebrating human rights pioneers whose motivating stories lift the human spirit. And it's about highlighting current issues and leading to increased awareness and the creation of more human rights advocates, which we so desperately need, who will champion causes and initiate much-needed change. While we are definitely going to be featuring Canada's stories, and sitting on the board, we just had an amazing presentation of the Canada Gallery, and I was in tears after it. It's looking really good. As we say in the theater world, folks, I think we have a show. But it's also going to highlight also international stories. And while we're going to be focusing on international stories, it's good to remember that this museum began right here in our beautiful Winnipeg. Now, I can assure you that I never set out to build this Human Rights Museum. I mean, like, it's this big honking thing. Who knew it was so big? Now I understand why it's been so much trouble. But the inspiration came from the Asper Foundation's Human Rights and Holocaust Studies program. And as most of you know, since 1997, the foundation has sponsored Canada's largest, robust educational initiatives aimed at promoting and sensitizing high school students to the consequences of racism and the horrors of genocide. Now, we've funded close to 10,000 Canadian students and chaperones from 110 different cities from coast to coast who participate in a comprehensive human rights study program. And this program involves a trip to Washington to see the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and other human rights museums, the American Indian Museum, the American History Museum, and it also requires 20 hours of volunteer time from the students. We've won 2 provincial awards for excellence in human rights education through this program, and the feedback from the participants was so incredibly inspiring that it got my dad thinking if a trip to Washington could have this kind of impact on the kids, perhaps a trip through Canada's stories might be even more inspirational. So that's when we started thinking, okay, we'll just reroute the trip to Ottawa. And that's when we found out during our audit of Ottawa that there isn't anything like the Holocaust Museum in Ottawa. There's no Holocaust Memorial. There's no place where the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is even displayed. And oddly enough, the Museum of Civilization does not cover Canada's human rights journey. So you won't find Ellen McClung in there, you won't find Louis Riel. So my great, very creative suggestion to my dad was that we just go back to Washington. And as I mentioned to many people, Dad, as an entrepreneur, tended to see things that don't exist. That's what entrepreneurs do, they hallucinate. So he saw the vision, and he decided that he would go to work and make it happen. And that's just what he did, aided and abetted by his indefatigable and energetic, brilliant sidekick, Mo Levy, over there. Mo Levy, Executive Director of the Asper Foundation. After a few too many martinis, in July of 2000, they came up with the idea that we're going to build this center right here at the Forks, and undertook huge feasibility studies, development and planning that has been going on for the last 11 years. And luckily, thanks to many of you in the room, with the devastating loss of my dad in 2003 from a heart attack, probably brought on by the stress of this project, I hate to say, thousands of individuals and donors and organizations continue to share the vision. Because we could have thrown in the towel. The easiest thing back then would have been for our whole family to just say, well, we've lost our champion, on to whatever else we feel we can accomplish. This was easy asking things, but it was like a Manitoba flood. It was widespread and very deep, and it was perpetual. It never seemed to end. There's a number of people that came forward and said, we want to make this happen. We're going to work with you to make sure it does. So now we're in our 11th year preparing for the opening in 2013, and we did have to be trailblazers. This project didn't have a precedent. We're the first new national museum to be constructed in Canada in over 42 years, and the first to be identified to be built outside of the National Capital Region, the first that's got a national student travel program at its core, and the first human rights center of this magnitude in the world. And I kept asking myself over the last few years, what the hell are we doing here? I'm just a corporate commercial lawyer. How did I end up here doing this? But that was what it was like working with Dad. It was always one big roller coaster ride, one adventure after another. And the greatest thing was that no matter what we were doing, we always knew that it mattered. So even if you failed, and there were many years over the last few years, we thought we were not going to make it. A lot of really dark, bleak times, I gotta tell you. But we thought, okay, even if we fail, we're gonna fail attempting to do something really important. And I can assure you that now that I've reached the half-century mark, I don't regret for a second not spending all those years drafting shareholders agreements or concluding corporate commercial transactions. I will be forever grateful to my dad for the crazy detour my life took, thanks to this project. I also love my dad's view that you have to approach this project with an uncompromising philosophy about excellence. Dad was driven and haunted by the notion that Canadians do tend to reach for the middle. We settle for mediocrity time and time again, and this city has often done that too, and I see that changing, and I'm really excited about this. Remember the star pin that we wear. And by the way, thank you for all wearing your star pins, and I absolve all the folks that forget to wear their star pins, because occasionally it happens to me too, and boy, do I ever hear about it when I don't show up in my star pin. But anyway, the star pin is for a couple of things. Personally, it was about reaching for excellence. Don't throw in the towel and go for the mediocre just because you're tired. It's so easy to do in all of our projects. I know you just think, oh God, never going to get there, but keep striving for excellence. And also remember that we all have an obligation to be human rights stars. That's the message of the museum. Every single exhibit is going to remind us that we all have an opportunity to make a difference. And extraordinary things are accomplished by ordinary people just standing up and doing the right thing. We're also the first national museum to have contributions from the city, the province, the federal government, and the private sector. This is a $310 million project. I thought that $16 million MTC campaign was daunting. Ha! It's good training. The federal government has committed $100 million towards the building and the content, and most of all, they have confirmed the ongoing annual operating costs. And kudos to Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who ignored the advice of dozens of bureaucrats in Ottawa who pleaded with him not to do this. He said, oh, please, you're going to make our life so difficult by making this a national museum. Don't do it. He bucked the decades of precedent and made this a national museum. And so we are all the beneficiaries of his vision for the West. The province has also been an incredible supporter by providing $40 million, and the city has contributed $23.6 million. All of the political leaders who stood beside us understood how important this museum project is to our future. And I want to note that this has been tough because we are the only museum that's had, the national museum that's had to come up with this kind of funding. The way it works in Ottawa generally is that national museums all get their funding from the federal government. So for example, the War Museum, it increased its budget by $30 million when it was opening, but that was covered by the federal government. And more recently, and we've been hearing people coming back to talk to us about this, the Natural History Museum just underwent what started as an $80 million renovation and ended as a $230 million renovation, and all of that was covered by Ottawa. So we on the campaign side have been getting a little bit of pushback because the view is that this should be done the same way. But we got to remember where we started, and we started from zero. So, Friends has been asked to raise $150 million from private sources to complete the museum's capital requirements. And thanks to many of you in the room today, we're at $125 million, which includes our family's visionary grant of $20 million. That last $25 million, and it is essential that we do so in order to reach for the stars. The good news is we've got national and international support, and if you've got any doubt about the international attention the museum's getting, I just have to remind you of the historic visit by Queen Elizabeth last summer when she came to the museum site and laid the cornerstone for the museum, which was a hand-picked stone from Runnymede, where the Magna Carta was signed. And we know that this museum appeals internationally. We have got donations from Italy, from Israel, from Denmark, from China. It's amazing. It's wonderful. And we are going to be discussing international issues. We're going to be bringing people in from around the world to debate these issues and inspire action worldwide. Now, turning to the most recent news, as most of you know, the museum's plans for a permanent Holocaust gallery have come under strong attack. I want to remind everybody that the original vision of this museum always included plans for a Holocaust gallery, and that vision has been supported by 3 different prime ministers, 2 premiers, 2 mayors, and over 6,000 donors. It's part of the vision that has been the foundation of over 10 years of work. The clear understanding between the Friends of the Museum for Human Rights and the museum's board and the management is that the money raised by Friends has been raised based on the museum delivering this well documented vision, and which was presented to over 1,500 individuals, groups, and corporations, and which donors are expected to see, not just with regard to the Holocaust Gallery, but with regard to all of the vision. But in the meantime, in 3 days, on May 8th, the world is going to recognize the 66th anniversary of the day the Holocaust ended in 1945. The Holocaust represents a singular, unprecedented event in human history that prompted the birth of the human rights movement and whose impact is felt every day in Canada through our criminal code, through our Broadcasting Act and our Broadcast Standards Act, human rights commissions and the Charter. And the lessons of the Holocaust continue to be universal and relevant today, and that's in general terms, in terms of all human rights issues and in genocides that are going on today, but also, unfortunately, in relation to global anti-Semitism today, which continues not only around the world, but right here in Canada. I'm mindful of the fact that when the museum sign went up, it was immediately defaced with rather graphic anti-Semitic die Jew and Nazi signs. Many of our donors received some pretty horrific anonymous letters, death threats, talking about how they were really ugly. I'm not going to go into them, but the point is, we're not out of the woods on anti-Semitism in the world today, for sure. And yet today, like before, resistance to recognizing the Holocaust in Canada continues. In 1998, efforts to place a permanent Holocaust gallery into the Canadian War Museum were met with loud, relentlessly open, and aggressive protests. And those plans were finally abandoned. Currently, there continues to be controversy, for some, surrounding the plan that includes a permanent, dedicated gallery for the Holocaust, and it seems to be tied in with the Holodomor or Ukrainian famine. And many of the same voices that were involved with attacking the War Museum's Holocaust Gallery are being heard again, protesting the museum's Holocaust Gallery. I want to be very clear. The struggles of Ukrainians, including the Holodomor, are stories and lessons that the museum will feature. The museum has repeatedly said this, the Holodomor is well known as a horrific event that warrants study now. But until recently, it was actually largely unknown by most Canadians. And it's exciting, frankly, that one of the museum's mandates is to increase awareness and education about human rights issues and events. And in the last few months, and a full 2 years before the museum's even open, the Holodomor has actually received more exposure in Canada than at any previous time in history in Canada. And the displays on this topic, which will be created by the world's foremost museum exhibit designer, Ralph Applebaum, will only further expand the world's awareness about this tragedy. So, interestingly, it will be because of a $20 million investment by a Jewish Canadian with a dream that these stories will finally be told. And we are really proud of this. But this in no way diminishes the role of the Holocaust in our understanding of human rights, and in no way impacts the planned Holocaust Gallery. Unfortunately, the tactics by those who oppose this are getting quite ugly, and kudos to Catherine Chatterley for highlighting the anti-Semitic nature of the postcard that was circulated from Ukrainian civil Such lobbying tactics have no place in Canada, and as John Stefaniak, chair of the Friends of the Museum of Human Rights Board of Directors, said so eloquently in a letter to the Free Press, I'm a Canadian who is proud of his Ukrainian ancestry. The Canadian Civil Liberties Association does not speak for me, nor does it speak for many others of all backgrounds, including Ukrainian, who passionately support the museum and its vision. Developing the museum by the agitations of single-issue special interest groups is inappropriate and wrong-headed. Thanks, John. Now, some of this controversy in this debate has overpowered the spectacular contributions this museum is going to be making, and is indeed making, to our economy. John McCallum, finance professor at the U of M, added that one surefire result will be the immeasurable but material, psychological, and confidence effects that will impact Winnipeg and its citizens. It makes people feel good, he said, about their local economy when they see a whole lot of stuff happening. This translates into a willingness to borrow money, buy houses and cars. The more confident and optimistic you are, the more willing you are to spend, and that makes the economy work. And that was exactly the pitch we used when we met with Stephen Harper right after he got elected back in '06. We said, Winnipeg doesn't believe in itself, but if you show that you believe in us, it will be a much-needed catalyst of boosting our self-esteem. And we were right. Now, one of the latest trends in tourism is visitors who are seeking out cultural experience as opposed to just lying on the beach. And the museum is projected to attract 250,000 visitors annually, who are projected to spend about $25.7 million a year. I don't know how they come up with these numbers, but this is Manitoba stats. These tourists will look for places to stay and to eat and to shop, and that will lead to filling our current hotels, maybe requiring new ones to be built, and new restaurants and stores. And the museum should also dramatically extend the convention center's ability to attract major conferences, which is, I think, why we need a new, fabulous convention center, architecturally significant. So I hope that if anybody's got any ins with that, I think that is really the next beautiful thing. We expect an increase in hotel taxes, and I'm so glad we have a hotel tax now, because that is going to be new cash going straight to the city's coffers. Expects $75 million in federal provincial tax revenues, and once running, the museum will be spending about $27 million annually in their operating revenues. And that provides another $7 million a year to federal and provincial tax coffers. One of my favorite things about this museum, and the reason why I'm so glad it's a federal institution, is that because it's federal, it has to pay the equivalent of taxes, city taxes. So that's going to be several million new dollars a year going to the city in perpetuity. So the city's $23.6 million contribution will be paid off in a few short years, and then it gets a guaranteed permanent income stream of taxes. And that is money that, but for this museum, wouldn't be going to the city. Because remember, there was just a dusty old parking lot there. That parking lot never generated revenue, and if it was going to be anything, I think the Forks folks were proposing that it be green space. So that's new money for police, for parks, for community centers, for stadiums. So it's important to understand what a gift this museum is to the city, which is why we insisted it be built here and not be built in Ottawa. We need and deserve projects like this, and it's a huge score for Winnipeg. And I have to say thank you, Councillor Habeck, because she gave a very spirited and eloquent statement at the Executive Policy Committee meetings to one of the people that were speaking against the museum project. And I couldn't have said it any better. Like, I didn't even brief her. It was amazing. It was from the heart. So thank you very, very much. And just recently, I love to talk about money, so forgive me. The Free Press printed another article talking about how the museum will be creating this tourism boom, and they referenced estimates that will account for $79 million a year in additional direct spending in the city, which is a spike of about 16.5% from the current $480 million of tourism spending. And a senior representative from Tourism Manitoba said, "We've already got more bookings for 2013 than we've got for 2012. I've been doing this for 12 years, and this is the first time I can honestly say there was such an exciting, positive outlook." Well, as women who've enjoyed the rights fought for by pioneers, and as Jewish women who understand the residual damage of hatred and oppression, and as Winnipeggers who enjoy the considerable economic benefits the museum will give us, we should be especially motivated to support the museum, and I do want to thank each and every one of you here who have supported us, because your support gave us credibility, it gave us clout, you convinced the federal government and the other governments to come on board, and I hope that you are going to be very proud of what you helped to create. I know that an investment in this museum isn't just going to yield economic prosperity, but it will yield a more peaceful and humane world. So when people ask me why I'm doing this, I just reply that I know, I never take my rights for granted. As a Jewish woman, I for sure don't take my rights for granted. I know I'm blessed to live in a country where, to quote Madam Justice Rosie Abella, I can wear my identity freely and in peace. And I also do this because, Winnipeg's my home, and I love this city. I think we deserve the best. And I think this museum should just be the first of many, many, many great things. And I can't wait to brainstorm with the folks at the Asper Foundation about what the next big things should be for us. while others in this world are enslaved. So I like to think of the museum as my way of fulfilling the mandate of Passover. And I like the thoughts of Harriet Tubman, who was the self-described conductor of the Underground Railroad. She said, "Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars and change the world." Folks, I knew my dad was a dreamer, but what's blown me away is how many of you have been dreamers too, and thanks to your vision, Ani ve'ata neshaner et ha'olam, you and I, we are all going to change the world. Shalom.